Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And I will endeavour to be brief. We all want some lunch and other people are likely to enter the room very shortly. So I can't summarise the discussion, but let me try and draw out a few salient points. Yesterday there was a lot of discussion about the relationship between science and politics, which was some of the time cast in terms of the relationship between facts and values, and it was generally agreed that facts don't, that you can't, as the saying goes, you can't derive an ought from an is. In other words, you can't derive policy from scientific facts, from which some people tried to infer or claim that science and politics inhabit completely separate watertight compartments. Now that claim, the credibility of that claim evaporated, I would argue, because in practice what we seemed, the majority of the room seemed to agree, was that the facts that are pursued and developed by scientists are guided by values and interests which influence which questions get asked, what counts as a relevant risk or relevant benefit, what counts as relevant data, how those data are gathered, how studies are conducted, and how the resultant studies are interpreted. So interests and values do influence the development of science for policy, but they also influence research and development agendas in innovation. I thought there was an interesting contrast between what Paul Leonard said and what Nick Ashford said, because Paul Leonard was saying, oh, we need science because we need innovation, as if innovation is a uniformly desirable thing, whereas Nick's argument seemed to be rather different, namely, innovation can go in a multiplicity of different directions, and what we want is not just more innovation of any old sort, but innovation towards products that give better performance. We don't just want more chemicals in our food supply, we want safer food. We want a diminished impact on the environment. And one way of looking at that, as Nick was arguing, is not just assessing individual technologies as applications are made for licensing, but comparing or competing technological solutions to particular problems. Now, I have heard the scholar of science and technology for policy, Sheila Jasinoff, utter the rather cynical remark that a risk assessment is a bit like a captured spy. If you torture them long enough, they'll say anything you want. I think that is an overly cynical view, but it is certainly, I was struck particularly by a remark that was made by a senior civil servant at the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food in the UK to the public inquiry into the mad cow disease BSE crisis, where he said in effect, oh, when you have an expert advisory committee, the most important thing is who you put on the committee. And they are chosen because of the kinds of judgments they make. So you can obtain the kind of the direction of advice you want if you carefully choose the kinds of people to be on it. And therefore, interests and values do matter, and we need not just transparency in the conduct of expert advisory committees, but transparency in the conduct of the selection of members of expert advisory panels. There's been an awful lot of talk about transparency, and rightly so, and it is a very important concept, but it is, of course, a contested concept. I didn't hear anyone arguing against transparency, but I did hear lots of different people interpreting that concept in different ways. Now, that contest is not going to go away. I think that many of us, I'm sure as I do, welcome the commitments to transparency made by the representatives of EFSA, EMA, and other organizations, and I think what will happen in the coming years is they will be held to those commitments. And this is a particularly valuable contribution that Corporate Observatory Europe and other organizations represented in this room have been making and will be making in the coming months and years to make sure that we really get what we've been promised, so that we get to understand not just how mandates get framed and how questions get posed, but how evidence gets generated, how evidence gets selected, how evidence gets interpreted, and how advice is generated. Transparency will be key. The other term that's been introduced is reproducibility, and there have been, as several people pointed out, problems with the reproducibility of studies, but EFSA has made an even bolder commitment. The board of the European Food Safety Authority has undertook to improve the way in which risk assessments are done so that not just studies, but the risk assessments are reproducible. And that strikes me as being a really bold commitment, and I look forward to that being kept, and I'm sure many of us will be keeping a close eye on those institutions to make sure they develop. Make sure they deliver. Thank you very much indeed.